Well, today we're joined by Matt Weinberg, who is a partner at Max Ventures. Matt, thanks for being here. We're excited for the podcast today. Why don't you start by telling us a little bit about Max Ventures?
Sure. Great to be here. Thanks for inviting me. Looking forward to this for a few weeks now. Max Ventures. We are an early stage VC fund based in New York City. Early stage for us, that means seed and pre-seed. So we really like to be the first check into these companies, so as early as possible. Early to the earliest extent, a part of our strategy is that we actually start companies. I wouldn't even call it an incubation or a studio strategy, but I'd say that we co-found companies with really talented entrepreneurs. We tend to do about one a year, and we've done 8 in the past 7 years. And knock on wood, we're working on number 9. So, in addition to early stage investing, we also start companies. We're on our third fund. We have about 100 million of AUM, and we've invested to go along with those 8 companies. We've invested in over 80 companies as well. From an early stage, industry perspective, I'd say we're a generalist fund that's overweighted in healthcare. So we've been investing in healthcare intentionally. We've been investing in healthcare the past 6 or 7 years, have found it to be a really compelling sector to invest in then and now from some micro and macro trends that we're seeing on the regulatory side and also on the technology adoption side and a lot of emerging technology, especially in the AI, ML space, if you want to call it that, really now being applicable to healthcare for the first time. So it's a really exciting era to invest in healthcare. But besides our healthcare focus, which comprises about half of our investing strategy, the rest is generalist.
Awesome.
And then maybe on the last point, we make about 8 to 10 investments a year and about 25 a fund cycle. And we're actively investing. So anyone listening that thinks that they're a fit for our fund, please reach out and hopefully I can give details on how to do that later.
Sweet. Well, you heard it here. Excited for that. So a lot to dig into, obviously, and we're looking forward to it. Let's start by kind of double clicking on, the 3 companies that and going on a 4th that you guys have co-founded. Talk to us about that process. How do you decide, what vertical that's in, with what founder that's with? Would love to hear more about that.
Sure, and it's 8, not 3 or 4.
I said 3, 4. My bad.
Yeah, no, it's okay. It seems like it's 20 because every company takes a long time and it's its own unique journey. So, happy to share more about that. So it usually comes down to about 2 profiles of how the incubation occurs or how the sort of building occurs. One is we'll have an idea. We'll do our research. We'll do a ton of customer discovery. We'll talk to people that are way smarter than us. We're really out there finding problems and then seeing if there's a solution that's venture backable. So once we do our extensive sort of internal diligence, we will get conviction, we'll capitalize it, and then we'll go out and we'll hire a founder or a co-founder or CEO. Usually in that case, we'll take a little bit of the common, and then we'll lead the pre-seed round and take some preferred shares. And then the whole point is to attract the best entrepreneur possible to found it with us. And again, we're not a studio. We're not taking 80% of the company and hiring almost these like mercenary operators. We really want to find someone that's a co-founder and in this with us for the long haul. So I think there's a few things that we do to try to maximize our chances at finding that person. One is obviously having capital partners around the table. So if we can raise from our colleagues in the VC industry before hiring the CEO, that's going to give a potential candidate a lot of conviction on the concept and on the idea. And then 2, I think equally as important is we try to find a first customer. So if it's in healthcare, we'll try to find, a hospital system to pilot it with. If it's in insurance, which is one that we're doing now, we'll try to find, a big carrier or a big enterprise partner to go to market with. So we're really trying to de-risk the opportunity for a world-class founder to come in and build with us. And I think the 2 major ways are obviously having enough capital to find that product market fit, at least in that seed stage round. And then 2 is having an initial customer to go to market with, gives you initial ARR, initial revenue, or at least, some major potential revenue partner to pilot and to test with. That's 1. 2 is we have worked with entrepreneurs before who, for one reason or another, want to bring a product to market in a different position of strength than maybe they would independently. So they look to us for the same skills or the same criteria I outlined before, where we can help them with their initial hires. We help them with their capital raise. We help them with their with the selling into those initial customers, and then really trying to bring that idea to market in the strongest position possible. So I'd say half of the ideas have been us sort of doing it soup to nuts, our idea, and then the other half has been we've known a really talented entrepreneur and we've worked together with that person from day one.
Right. And what was kind of the thought process of building that into the strategy of the fund?
Yeah, it's a good question. Like anything else, I think there's a when you're starting a fund. Max Ventures is a startup in its own right, right? Our product just happens to be investing in startups and building startups. But in our own right, we're only on our third fund, so I'd say, from for all definition purposes, we still are a startup. So when we started Max Ventures in 2017 and we conducted our first incubation, I think that we saw a few advantages to it, and I think they've been proven out over time. But a little bit was opportunistic. So we saw a company in Nashville. So this company called Porter Road Butcher, which was an exceptional, phenomenal local butcher shop. We saw that there were companies like Omaha Steaks making hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue going, direct to consumer nationwide. We thought, why not bring this, really cherished brand locally and try to expand it nationally? And so we ended up doing that with Porter Road Butcher. And the benefits were major. So not only is there an equity position, an equity upside that we are, I don't say entitled to, but that we take for the incubation. So say our average ownership is about 10% in our normal seed stage deals. For something like a Porter Road or for other incubations, we try to get more than that. Obviously, sometimes it's double, but we want to keep the cap table very healthy for future investors and future operators to come in. But there's an equity upside component. Two is that it just makes us better at our jobs, right? So the more incubations we do, the more companies we build, the better we are at understanding entrepreneurs, understanding how to diligence, understanding how to help them once we do invest in them. Since we've built 8 companies before, I'd say, when I'm trying to pitch an entrepreneur, why take our capital? Because capital is a commodity. Not only are we good investing partners, but we're good building partners as well. And then third, and this one was more, I think, conceptual at the beginning, but has proven itself over time, is that the people you meet through an incubation process, it's almost like a proprietary network. So if we're hiring a CEO, we may interview 10 to 20 candidates before we find the one that we want to work with or that's the right fit for us. But from that, maybe 2 or 3 of those we really like, keep in touch with. And when they go out and start companies, they've enjoyed the process of meeting us and we've ended up investing in their companies.
Yeah,
So
for
in
sure.
addition to just angels that you meet operators, you're just meeting a different set of people when you're company building versus just investing. And we did a post-fund audit of Fund 2, and it turned out from the 3 incubations we did, it led to about 30% of the companies that we invested in came in some shape, way, or form from those 3 incubations, whether it was an entrepreneur we met along the way, an angel that invested in one of our incubations, or another person that was just, orbiting that process for us. So a lot of advantages to it. It's hard. I think a lot of people think that it's a lot easier said than done, but it's definitely now a concrete part of our strategy.
Yeah, and now discounted holiday gifts with the butcher shop. So
100%. Yeah, we have. I was about to say the discount code out loud, but I probably
yeah,
shouldn't.
you probably should. Why not?
I'll send it to you later, but
You too.
it's the most delicious meat I've ever had. Although I'm not the biggest meat eater anymore, but when I was, it was a weekly order for me for sure, and
They
for
have
my
pulled
family.
pork.
They have pulled pork, yeah, for sure.
1000%. Yep.
Cool. I will send it to you later.
I love the flexibility and being innovative in the industry, which is great to see. And it's interesting to hear all the kind of beneficial effects of being in that strategy. How do you? I'm just curious. How do you ideate? Like, do you sit around and say, "Hey, we saw this need in this other company. Maybe there should be a separate company," or how do you make that happen?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thanasis. Yeah, wish I had some more time to just sit here and think more strategically or abstractly about problems we see in the market. But honestly, I think for us, it's just talking to smarter people, right? And that includes a lot of our portfolio CEOs. So especially in healthcare, which is a really tricky industry to bring products to life in. We consistently talk to our CEOs. We consistently ask them what problems they're facing. And the last incubation we did from the last fund was a company called Elion Health, Elion Health. And we were talking to, and it's also evident of why I think healthcare is such an exciting area to invest in. But we were talking to our CEOs, this is 2021, 2022, and they were all saying, we know that there's an explosion of healthcare technology coming to market. We are having a tremendously difficult time understanding what technology to select, understanding where to find it, understanding how to differentiate between 5 products that are all venture backed that all say the same thing on their websites. We know that there's solutions out there for us that are going to help, augment our company in a really positive way, but it's really hard for us to get conviction on how to buy that technology. So I was hearing that consistently from our portfolio companies. On the other end of it, as an investor, we were investing in some of those companies. So it was almost like, the first innovation of healthcare, and not to get too sidetracked, I think in the 2016, 17, 18 was more on the care delivery side. So new ways to access healthcare. And, we invested in companies, Heartbeat Health, Eden Health, Vori Health. Heartbeat Health obviously for heart. Eden's more on primary care. Vori Health is musculoskeletal. But you have new ways of accessing healthcare, whether it's telehealth, virtual, but it's more just like a contemporary experience for the patient to see a doctor. Within that, there's a whole tech stack, right? So if I'm a company like Vori Health or Heartbeat Health, I'm using some sort of video platform like this. I'm using a credentialing and licensing software to help doctors get credentialed, not only in a certain geography, if Heartbeat's in New York, but in a place like Arizona, New Mexico, Washington State. I'm using a revenue cycle management billing technology that like hospital systems are using antiquated versions. If I'm a new age company, I'm trying to use something that's more new and more fitting my needs as a startup, as something that's more innovative. So we were investing not only in those companies that were facing the patient, but we were also investing in the sort of IT tech stack. But during that time, the IT tech stack, there were just way too many options for these companies to decide between. So when I was investing in companies like CertifyOS, which is a credentialing licensing software, Adonis, which is RCM, there's 4 or 5 competitors out there that are all venture backed, that all, I don't say pretend, but that all at least articulate the same value prop. So I was having problem as an entrepreneur, as an investor, figuring out which company to invest in because there were so many options. My companies that would be potential customers for those companies were having problems deciding what technology to purchase because there were just way too many options. And so I was talking to an entrepreneur that brought up a company, G2.com, which is basically Yelp for software. And just like a light bulb went off in my head. And I was like, wow, if there's a marketplace for software, that people go to and read reviews and help understand, which software to buy, why isn't there a vertical for healthcare? Healthcare is 20% of our GDP. Almost 30% of all data produced is healthcare. It's just such a massive part of our economy, and it's such a massive spend that there should be some sort of consolidated research marketplace for people to go to understand healthcare technology better. And so I went to one of the smartest people I knew in healthcare on the investing side, this woman, Lily Huang, who was at NEA at the time. She was a partner there. And I asked her, I said, is this a good idea? Like I'm flirting with this incubation concept, like a marketplace for people to go and understand healthcare technology better. And her eyes lit up and she's like, this is an amazing idea. If you guys start it, we'll start it with you. We'll fund it with you. And NEA is obviously a huge fund. And that indicated that not only were smaller companies having this problem, but NEA obviously is like a lot later stage companies, they were having the same problem too. So, we ended up starting that company together. And we capitalized it, like I mentioned before, Jenny, with our sort of strategy. So we got initial customers, we got a lot of VCs around the table, a lot of great VC partners. And then we hired an amazing CEO, this guy, Bobby Gulich, who was really early at Oscar, I think like a top 5 hire, and then was the head of operations at Trial Spark. And now it's doing great and it's out there. And anyone that's trying to figure out this crazy world of healthcare technology should go to Elion.health. And you'll have an easier time navigating that. So sorry for the long-winded answer, Thanasis, but that's kind of how one of those ideas came. And to consolidate or synthesize, it's really just talking to as many smart people as possible and finding as many interesting and acute problems as possible, and then doing the work to see if there's a venture backable solution that can solve that problem.
Well, that's I think a great example of how being in the field, you can spot a problem and kind of make it happen. And that's great. We are interested ourselves in health tech, and in fact have been making some investments in that space recently. So I would be interested in your take. Like, do you have a specific thesis? I mean, technology is obviously enabling, I think, new capabilities, enabling marketplaces or networks of providers. There's many different kind of new pathways. AI is coming in and kind of making human processes a lot more efficient. What's your general take on the space today? What areas are you looking for for innovation?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot. I think what we don't do is we don't do medical devices. We don't do life sciences. I wish we did sometimes. We just don't have the team and the bandwidth for it. So, what we really focus on, the 1.0 I mentioned was care delivery. So these new ways of patient experiences in healthcare. And then the second phase, which we're still in, I think, is this sort of IT, enterprise SaaS for healthcare. So I think that there's a few macro trends occurring. One is regulatory. So the 21st Century Cures Act mandates a lot of patient data be accessible in one system. So if you're a hospital, you're a patient that's moving around different specialists or around different hospitals, that data needs to be accessible. Two is there's a lot of mandate to get data from, I would say, what's like an on-prem environment. So a lot of these hospitals, believe it or not, have a lot of their data just sitting in these servers. Hospital systems, there's multiple different hospitals within one system. Those data that are sitting on-prem in those different systems cannot coordinate and talk to each other. And I'll give an example in a second to hopefully make it a bit more salient. So we're seeing all these hospital systems get their data onto the cloud, which creates this warehouse. And this data is becoming more high fidelity, where you're able to sort of overlay emerging technology on it for a variety of outcomes. Some, like you mentioned, on the clinical side, helping doctors better assess patient outcomes, but a lot of it's on the administrative side too, right? So if I'm a hospital system, that had like a supply chain analytics problem where I have 12 different hospital systems, I can't really tell, which system is buying what. It can go from PPE, masks and needles and syringes or what have you, all the way to really complex devices for radiology scanning machines, right? So not having a bird's eye view, and even like a food procurement, right? The hospitals spend hundreds of $millions on food, so not having a bird's eye view of your spend and your POs and your vendor management, and now having all of that data in one central warehouse where you can apply tools like AI, ML. I don't know, generative AI, maybe not the right use case for that example, but these emerging technologies, I make the parallel. They're just like supercharged engines, right? But if you put the wrong fuel through those engines, nothing really is going to happen. It's like, I'm not a car guy at all, so this might even be a wrong example, but like it's like putting diesel fuel into like a Ferrari engine. It's going to break the car or something, right? So now hospitals, and now I think healthcare in general, is finally flirting with high fidelity data, which makes a lot of these sort of possibilities that were conceptual a few years ago a reality today. So we're really excited, really, by that broad macro micro trends, so to speak. And I think that some of the solutions, aren't even the sexiest, right? It's not like the solving for cancer, which I think that, those potentials are out there and becoming more realistic also. Very, very exciting. But, for us as investors, it's like, can there be a better supply chain analytics tool to help hospitals save millions of dollars on how they spend and manage inventory across a lot of different subsectors in their system? So stuff like that really excites us. And I think it's a really good time. We're seeing a lot of companies come to market tackling these sort of hard but mundane but now accessible problems, and ones with big, with potentially big TAM outcomes.
How many investments have you guys made within the health tech space, and like what's the overall percentage of health tech within the portfolio to date?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not sure the number. It's 20, probably 20 something, but it's represented about half the capital that we invested in Fund 2, which was a 2020 vintage. And so far, it's been about half of our new fund as well, from a capital invested perspective. And from a company perspective, I think it's around 40%.
Is New York a good place, you think, to invest in
Oh,
health?
it's a great
Yeah.
place.
Tell us a little bit about that, because I don't often think of it as kind of a great place for health tech investing.
Yeah, I mean, you have like anywhere else, it's sort of the the ingredients of, if you have these big exits, it leads to more entrepreneurs that start healthcare, that start in a particular field. It leads to more angels that invest in a particular field or a particular sector. So healthcare, you've had a lot of big exits, right? You've had Oscar, you've had ZocDoc, you've had Flatiron Health, you've had a lot of outcomes where you've had millionaires had that have come from those companies, not just the CEO, but people, the executive team, and even under. And so that leads to more innovation in that space. So I mentioned Elion Health. Bobby came from Oscar, and he was one of the first top 5 hires of Oscar. He's now the CEO of Elion. Another company, Certify OS, I mentioned. That's a company that's doing exceptional General Catalyst led a pretty big Series A, and they're marching towards their Series B. He came from Oscar as well. And so you start to see these big companies, spin out these entrepreneurs that then start, in their local ecosystems, because that's where they have access to the most resources and the most network and the most venture capital partners. And so, healthcare in New York City, I don't think there's a better place to be a healthcare investor. I mean, Silicon Valley, always is powerful in most industries, but healthcare specifically, I think New York is a great ecosystem.
Yeah, and particularly I think after New York was one of the first places to open up after COVID, right? So I think a lot of people kind of flocked to New York and of course once it opened too. So especially in recent years.
Yeah, it's made all the rents in Brooklyn go up, which is thank you.
Yeah, I actually saw, I think that did it come out today or yesterday, just the places, best places to rent, worst places to rent. And it was, I think Brooklyn was absolutely the top of the list.
Was the worst. Yeah. I saw that. I didn't want to click on it because it would make me sad. So I live in Williamsburg, and I was like, I live in Brooklyn. It's I know how much I pay for rent, and I don't want someone to tell me how bad it is. But it makes it hard to move, and it makes it hard to plan for your next stage of life. It's family planning, a house, saving. So hopefully, I don't know. I don't see the prices going down, but hot take, maybe I don't stay in New York forever. Who knows?
All right. So talk to us a little bit about your background. You spent some time in DC, as we just discussed. Would love to hear more about that.
Yes, I did many years in DC. So I started my career in the public sector, which maybe is a weird sort of path to VC, but it does make a little more sense once I sort of talk about some of my roles in government. But I started basically as a White House intern. I think I got the coolest job in politics, which I was a travel aide for President Obama. So I would travel the country, going to all of these events, campaign events or a political event or what have you. If the president wanted to speak about education policy, our team would pick the right district, whether that was a district in Florida, pick the right school, set up all the meetings with local politicians, maybe set up a fundraiser to go on top of it. So it's called the scheduling and advance team. And so I was responsible for going to that location in Florida, figuring out the logistics with the school, figuring out logistics with the fundraiser, how the president, would walk onto a stage and walk off of a stage, and all of those really minute details that make those events successful or a disaster. But 99% of the time, they were always very successful. Really smart people working on those teams. Basically like event planning to the extreme. So that was a really cool job. Got to ride the motorcade and do a lot of really fun things that I have pictures of and think fondly of. I say that because then I think I went to the least cool job in politics, which was the head of offline merchandise sales for the 2012 Obama campaign. So if you ever see a bumper sticker, T-shirt, there was everything I can imagine: hoodies, keychains. We made umbrellas. It was just really, really crazy. A big SKU list of items that we would sell. So
it sounds like you throw really good parties now. You have the whole event planning, then you have the merch,
Yeah, we had great parties. I mean, we raised a ton of money. I mean, to your point, I mean, it went from a zero. I think campaigns are really similar to startups. So when I joined, I left DC to move to Chicago for a year, which is where the campaign headquarters was in 2012. I think I was maybe the top 100 person that was hired there, maybe 70 or something. And by the time it was over, there was almost 1,000 people working in that office. That's just the headquarters, maybe 700 to 1,000. Nationwide, it was tens of thousands of people in all of those different field offices across the country. But even in that building, there was over 700 people. It had gone from a $0 company almost to $1 billion company. In my little small universe, we sold, I think the number was close to $40 million in merchandise. And the worst part about it was that every time we sold a piece of merchandise, it had to comply with finance. It had to comply with the election laws, FEC rules and regulations. So basically, you would have to get a contribution form attached to any T-shirt that you sold if it was physical. And so I would have these mail trucks kind of move to my desk by the end of it, just stacked full of receipts and contribution forms and stacks of cash. And so there was a lot of reconciliation, many hours, teams of volunteers kind of entering that all into the computer. It was still pretty analog those days.
I've always been curious, what are the things, I mean, that sounds like a fun job, both of these, right? What?
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people have been successful coming out of those roles, right? And what do you think? What are the things that you learned doing that? And it's obviously like almost like a startup on steroids, right? Because you have to grow really fast and get a lot of stuff done.
No, that's a good, I mean, totally astute observation. I think that you can really push yourself because there's an end date. So we were all working 100-hour weeks, right? But we were all 25. I think I was 25, 24, 20, 25, 26 or something. And, I don't know if I would do that again, like push myself to that limit. But I learned a ton on the sort of travel aid side. I mean, you learn just like a sense of professionalism is I struggle for the vocab, but you really needed to be buttoned up. You need to be able to talk to people. You can't be starstruck. You need to just be at all times sort of on and just very aware, very detail oriented, very diligent. And then on the merchandise, I mean, that was like running my own little business, right? For 11 months. And I learned about supply chain. I learned about margins. I learned about labor negotiations. I learned about inventory management, learned about distribution of product. And so I came out of that with like a really keen sense of business knowledge and just maybe even more like a keen interest in wanting to interface with the private sector. So
how many Obama bumper stickers did you have on your car?
I mean, I still remember the SKU number. SKU007 is like the famous like Obama like Biden 2012 like blue bumper sticker. Like these are just imprinted in my head. I have a ton of merch. Like my fridge is all like all the magnets that we made. I have a big box of stuff with all the pins and stuff.
I would imagine. Okay.
I kind of wish I had more like, because I was so sick of looking at it by the end of like all the merchandise that I took a couple t-shirts for friends and family. And now I'm like, there was one really cool sweatshirt that I liked that I had one and I lost it. And I was like, oh, I should have had a backup. But by the end of it, like it was making me sick, like looking at all the different merchandise items we had. But yeah, so I mean, to your point, like I think it got me to a really cool position afterwards that I really didn't have a business getting or I didn't really have the background for. But I was a history major and political science major in college. I was always just like interested in different topics related to like how cities grow and form and like I was interested in innovation in a way, but like a lot of it of like how different cities transition over the years. And I was reading this book kind of coincidentally and transformative for me, but it's called The Metropolitan. And now it's like 10 years old, but it's called maybe like 15 years old. It was called The Metropolitan Revolution by Bruce Katz, who's a big think tank guy at the Brookings Institute. And I was reading it, and this was right after the campaign or after the inauguration, which was a lot more fun than the campaign. So for 3 months, we're all working to throw this big party, the presidential inauguration. I was on the ticketing team. So I was able to get all of my friends tickets to the inauguration. I was never at the height of my political power than I was in January of 2013 when I was on the ticketing team. But at least for now, but yeah, I don't think I'll reach that height again. But I was reading this book and it was talking about New York City. That's how I got to New York originally. And it was talking about how that financial crisis was really, to the Great Recession of 2008, 2009, really impactful in New York because it was way over indexed in financial services. So a big part of its economy was really tied to the financial services industry. And Mayor Bloomberg at the time, and this book, I was reading this was like 2012, 2013, early 2013, late 2012. We were talking about how the Bloomberg administration really wanted to diversify away from financial services towards tech, innovation, and entrepreneurship. And the big marquee sort of apex program that they launched was something called Cornell Tech, which was a worldwide competition to build a state-of-the-art life science technology engineering campus on Roosevelt Island, which is this island in the East River. And the city had the land, so it would be free land, but they put out this, massive RFP, request for proposal. Universities from around the world submitted, and they ended up going with Technion University in Israel and Cornell here in New York, obviously, and to create this university called Cornell Tech, which eventually was going to graduate, thousands of engineers a year and lead to a lot more homegrown innovation for New York City. I was reading that book and I'm like, if a city can do that, like and an agency that they listed that they referenced that was spearheading this, on behalf of the Bloomberg administration was an agency called the New York City Economic Development Corporation, the NYCEDC for short. And I was like, I remember at that time, after the inauguration, I started applying for interesting jobs in the administration. Mostly, again, I wanted to do something private sector facing. So Department of Commerce, Department of Treasury, some really cool roles, right? But I was reading this book. I was just struck by the fact that if a city agency could do something that innovative, that's kind of where I wanted to be. And so I got to New York. I started to network. I started to meet people that worked at that agency, that worked on the team that that was responsible for that program and other programs that I would read about that were all focused on technology and entrepreneurship. And so the city was doing a lot at that time. This was 2012, 2013, to make New York City into what it is today. So they put resources into every sector that exists in New York. We're talking fashion, we're talking real estate, we're talking healthcare, even arts and nonprofits, and then media for sure. They were putting resources into helping innovators and entrepreneurs grow businesses within those verticals. So the city had these different programs, whether it was mentorship or like micro grants or connecting, big companies to smaller companies for M&A purposes, bringing in the universities, bringing in the nonprofits. And it was just like a super fascinating and I think really innovative part of city government. And I was like, I really want to work here. And so I started networking. I started, trying to meet people for coffees and get the lay of the land, and a position opened up and I applied. And I think to your point, Thanasis earlier, like they were like, look, and the position was on the tech and media team. So it was like any emerging technology. And then in media, I would be a senior project manager responsible for some of the programs that I mentioned. There were different flavors of programs, but they would be in my portfolio. I would be driving these programs forward. And I think they looked at my resume and they're like, this guy doesn't have any technology experience, but he ran, an operation that netted $30 million in sales in 11 months. He was on the presidential advance team. He can't be that stupid, or, he can't be that incompetent, I guess. And so they took a shot on me, and my job was honestly helping entrepreneurs in New York City in 2013, 14. The community was still very small. And so through that job, I met the founders of amazing companies. So we're talking that went through the programs that we were running. We're talking, Foursquare, Etsy, Warby Parker, Harry's, Common Bond, you kind of name it. They went through one of these city programs. And then I got to meet all of these amazing VC firms, Union Square Ventures, RRE. There's a few others at the time escaping me, but there weren't that many. First Mark, there weren't that many VC funds there at the time either. So the city was a real convener in bringing together startups and the VC community. And so I kind of got my quote unquote sea legs in this ecosystem. And then I'll just wrap up my quick government career story. But then, I did that for 2 years, learned a ton, really kind of fell in love with New York and our tech ecosystem here. But I really wanted to get back to DC for the last couple of years of administration. I figured I would never have a shot again at working in the White House or working in the Obama administration. So I pinged my friend at the White House, who was in an office called the Presidential Personnel Office that, kind of puts all the political appointees in the right roles. And I was like, hey, I'd love to come back. I remember I knew him from the campaign. So I was like, hey, I'd love to come back to DC for a couple of years. Like, this was like early 2015. I was like, what do you got for me? And he was like, you've been doing all this really interesting work in New York. He's like, there's a really cool role in the Office of Investment and Innovation. He's like, I think you'd be perfect for. So I ended up getting that role as a senior advisor. And basically the federal government has billions of dollars that it allocates to early stage technology companies. A lot of it is research and development commercialization. A lot of it is just grant access for certain profiles of technology companies. If you think about the government, you have all of these different sectors that it represents: energy, education, health and human services, defense, obviously. And every department has a lot of funding that it allocates to not just big contractors, but to really early entrepreneurs and early technology companies. And so the office that I worked in coordinated all that funding on behalf of all the federal agencies. And so I got to be really involved in those programs, which was exceptional. There's also a exceptionally interesting and I think exceptional that the government has those programs. They're very, very successful, but I don't think they're widely known. And then the government also has a fund-to-fund, which is called the SBIC program, Small Business Investment Company program, which sadly, I don't know if sadly is the right word, but is not quite applicable to early stage VC. It's more kind of allocated towards private equity, but I do think it gets more money into early stage and small business ecosystem. So I'm very supportive of it. And then it also runs a bunch of accelerator incubator competitions and just really gets a lot of money out the door for tech sector economic development. So I was, right in the middle of all of that. And then, not to get too political, but something happened in 2016, a certain election that changed the trajectory of my career. And when Donald Trump won, I was a political appointee, which just meant that I lost my position with the administration. My last day was his inauguration day. And we all quote unquote get fired, but there's a political appointee percentage of people, or I guess class, quote unquote, and they all transition with the White House. But most people in government stay. They're sort of career civil servants, but the political folks leave. And then the Trump team came, and I went back to school, and I was like, I think it's time for me to leave government for a while. Changed my perspective on a lot of things when that happened. And I went back I knew I wanted to go back to New York because I felt like I had the best network here, and knew the most people in VC and startup land. And that's eventually where I wanted to go. And I went to got my master's here, grad school, and then joined Max Ventures in 2018. And 6 years later, Fund 3, and everything I described before. But happy to talk about how that actually happened, or any other more interesting questions.
Is the team all based in New York, and what is there a kind of a similar background of the partners, or tell us a little bit about the team there?
Yeah, sure. It's just me and one other partner. We have pretty different backgrounds. He grew up in Tennessee. Ryan Darnell, awesome guy, and obviously someone that I've wanted to and will continue to want to work with for the long haul. But yeah, he went to he's trying to be a professional baseball player, so he went to Middle Tennessee State. When that didn't work out, which doesn't happen, he knew that pretty early. But he was still a Division I athlete, which is way better than I was. But when that didn't work out, he ended up working at a company called Ingram, which is one of the biggest book publishers in the Southeast, even in the country. And he also, through another position, incubated a company that was a rum company for this guy Kenny Chesney, which he's a country music singer, which isn't
It's pretty well known, I would say.
Yeah, I think he's pretty well known for sure. Yeah, I mean, I don't know the name. I couldn't name you his songs, but that was one of the first celebrity, predates the Ryan Reynolds, and all that sort of stuff. So I think through that process, he was able to incubate this company, and he kind of fell in love with entrepreneurship and company building, and then that extends to Max Ventures DNA now. And then he worked for a family office doing early stage investing, wanted to start his own, and then that family ended up backing him, or kind of being his anchor. And then that's when I met him right after that. So, our first fund was around 10 million, and I met Ryan right when he closed that. And the strategy was, not only are we an early stage venture fund, but we're a startup, right? Like I mentioned, our strategy is investing in early stage companies, building early stage companies, and then the healthcare angle too. And so for me, when I met him, I was deciding between that and some bigger funds. And, I was like, not only do I have the chance to be, almost a co-founder, or a lot of upside to build this together with him, but I love the strategy of, not only investing, but building as well. I think, the fact that we've been able to build 8 companies has really made me better at my job for sure, and has given me a lot of energy that I think being a regular investor would not have. Or just exclusively investing would not have.
Awesome. Well, at this point, we're going to flip to 4 standard questions we always ask at the end of our podcast. So the first is our NVCA question. So the National Venture Capital Association is a partner of ours, and as you may know, they advocate for policy on behalf of the venture community. So if you had to advocate for a policy in venture, what would that be? And you having background in government, I think that would be I'd be interested from your perspective as well.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'd love to maybe talk offline and understand more how to get involved, because it's an organization I'm aware of. I really there's a panel that I really wanted to watch. Charles Hudson was on it recently. I should watch the recording, but him and I are catching up in a week, and I'm interested to hear how it went. I read through the deck, and I think there's a few things. One is a little bit of a cop-out answer, but I think there's nuance, right, that government sometimes lacks from a regulatory perspective. So a lot of regulators are really smart people. They come from industry, but they may not come from, they may not be collective or representative of the whole industry. And so I'm an early stage fund. Our fund size is very, very small compared to an Andreessen Horowitz, and we should just not be regulated the same, right? So if there are changes in carried interest, which I don't think there should be, if there are, changes in reporting, if there are these changes that are being proposed, and I'm not familiar with all of them, but I'm familiar with some of them, I really just hope that the regulators keep in mind the difference between a business like mine and a business like General Catalyst, Andreessen Horowitz, and Redpoint. It is a completely different business. If you take away something about a carried interest, tax advantage, I don't know if it makes sense for me to be an early stage investor. Like, there's a lot easier ways to make money. And then, from like a timeline perspective, 8 to 10 years to see these exits realized. If there's not a tax advantage for it, or at least it's not even taxed like long-term capital gains, then I don't know what we're doing here. And it's incentivizing people to invest in early stage innovation, entrepreneurship. 2/3 out of every job that's created in America comes from small businesses. And so anything the government can do to get more money into small innovative technology companies, it should, 100%. So it needs to be careful about looking at funds, broadly, being the venture capital industry or the private equity industry. There is a lot of nuance between, sizes, stages, sectors.
That's actually one area where the NVCA is spending a lot of time on. And it's not just carried interest, it's also regulatory framework, right? Like some new regulations that are put in place that are kind of, a larger fund has an incumbency advantage at being able to meet because they have the resources. And when you're a smaller fund, you just kind of restricts. So, I think given your background, I think it could be an interesting role for you to play to educate some of the members.
Sign me up. Yeah. I know that there was like a new reporting requirements that they were proposing that then got shot down because they went to the judge in Louisiana, which I think is an interesting strategy to go to like a favorable judge to get something stayed or to get something paused. And then there was the LP number increase, which I agree with. It's like, I don't want 500 LPs, but I think, again, the more money you can get into the hands of micro funds, micro VCs, people that are really there for the first check investing, I'm all about that. I can give you a more nuanced answer for me, for my time in government, but there's something called the SBIC program, which I mentioned, the Small Business Investment Company program. It's really hard and it's matching funds. So it's a 2-to-1 matching funds on debt capital. So basically you would pay back the money once you sort of get DPI, or once you have liquidity, you'd pay back the government at a super, super low interest rate. And so you can conceive of a fund, and you don't need to draw it down. But if I got an SBIC license, I'd be entitled to have a pool of debt capital that was super, super cheap that I could take and assume and then, put into my winner. So if I was a $10 million fund, I could conceptually have access to an additional 20 million. And if I had a couple breakouts, I could really help, leverage the fund returns that way. The product is just so cumbersome for VCs to apply and get. VCs of my profile or even higher. I think you have to be a pretty, like you said, like well-resourced fund to go after it. And I think it makes more sense, honestly, for like mezz debt funds and private equity funds. And so like the big funds, like your General Catalyst, they're not even going for it because it's like they don't even want to have to deal with it. But it exists. I think it's a $4 billion pool of capital that's allocated, or that at least is conceptually there for these funds to apply for. So I really want something that's like more conducive for early stage VC funds. So that would be one. And then the SBIR program, the Small Business Innovation Research Program, I'm always up for that being increased. So that is about 2% or 2.5% of the federal R&D budget that goes specifically to these really early stage technology companies. I always think it should be increased. Again, get more money to smaller companies that are really on the cutting edge of innovation, because VCs aren't funding, really early stage tech commercialization. It's just like not what we do, right? It's not the right risk reward for us. So the government has a huge role in that. And can it get more money again into those people that are commercializing innovative tech across all these areas, whether it's healthcare, crypto, bio, life science. The NSF, by the way, if I was an entrepreneur, Google NSF tech topics, you'd be surprised. Like, they have blockchain, they have AI, they have anything you can imagine. They're putting money into it. And so budgets like that, I think, should be increased, and it keeps our competitive advantage as a country. It's a big part of what makes us special. So that's what I would advocate for.
Number two, if you were not a VC and money was no object, what would you be doing?
I'd go back to government. The key word there, money was no object, and you could have a family and be secure and safe. But I think I would go back to the public sector in some way. I don't know if I'd want to be an elected official. It's a pretty nasty game of running elections, and you're fundraising all the time. And one of my best friends just became a congressman, Gabe Amo. He's an exceptional human out of Rhode Island. But his job, a lot of it is, some of it is on the policy side. I'm sure he's going to have an illustrious career in Congress. He's a congressman now, and He's going to do amazing things, but a lot of the job is fundraising also. So he's always out there going to events, fundraising, and it seems like the part that although I'm a VC and I fundraise obviously for my fund, it seems like a part I wouldn't like, but I would love to be like the commerce secretary or something. That's like my dream job. Someone appoints me to a role that I can kind of, execute on some of the things that we're talking about today, like how to keep America more dynamic, how to keep our small innovative businesses thriving. If I could be the leader or a leader that was really focused on that, that would be, that would be a dream job for me. And then, obviously, if I could be a professional basketball player for the Celtics, that would be number one. But I think my genetics and my age prevent me from that at this point.
Who is someone you look up to and why?
Personally, my father. I love my dad. He, is always not only been an excellent father, but as a career, very inspiring. He's a criminal defense attorney, but he's almost an entrepreneur where he, went to Harvard Law, didn't go to a big law firm, went right into becoming a criminal defense attorney, kind of reminds me of my path a little bit, worked for a guy who was a little bit older than him, that ran a really small firm and became a partner really quickly. And then, grew that firm and grew the book of business to an extent where then he went off and he became, his own sort of professional. And now, he's one of the most well-regarded lawyers in Boston and, really, really prominent attorney there and someone that's deeply respected in the community. But just to see how, you can be an entrepreneur in a field where a lot of people don't become entrepreneurs, I think was really rewarding for me. I didn't, you don't appreciate your parents and what they do until you're a little bit older, like maybe after college in the 20s. And so seeing how he was able to build his career, become one of the best, but do it in his own way where he's his own boss and has his own firm. And then I think there's also a diversity of content that's similar. So every case is really different if you're a defense attorney, just like in VC, every deal, at least in our sort of environment, really looks differently. So love my dad, big inspiration for me. And then maybe on the more sort of like VC side, Kevin Ryan, someone I've always looked up to. So he, being the CEO of DoubleClick, starting MongoDB, co-founding it, Business Insider, a host of different companies, and then growing his firm Alicorp now into a pretty big platform that not only invests but also incubates. And he's also someone that's civically engaged in the community also. So he just hosted an interview with Mayor Adams from New York last week that I went to, and he started like a nonprofit arm of his firm also that invests in not only revenue driving opportunities but also nonprofit as well. So he's someone that is polymath kind of person that has a lot of diverse interests that he's pursuing and executing on, and also just a really legendary entrepreneur and investor. So, someone I definitely look up to in the professional community.
That's great. And finally, what is the best piece of advice you've ever received from someone?
I was thinking about this question, and I don't have anything that's not corny. There's one thing. So I think I recently had a family member become pretty sick and has immobilized her, and so I think it's given me a lot more gratitude. So I think I don't know. I don't want to say like take a breath and be in the moment, but I just think of her whenever I'm tired or whenever like I don't want to go for a run, or if there's something that I'm if there's some sort of, if I'm upset, you can have your bad days. You don't need to always be happy and optimistic, but I think if it's like I think about her really constantly, and to be like, well, like she would love to be doing this right now, right? Or she would love to be going for a jog, or she would love to be going out to dinner with her friends, and she just can't do a lot, like 95% of the things that she could have done 5 years ago, she can't do today. And so very much in my mind as I kind of go day to day and sort of deal with my own frustrations or my disappointments or my own sort of like energy levels, I keep that really, really present for me, and I think it's helped me remain more in the moment, or have a lot more gratitude where maybe 5-6 years ago I wasn't quite as present or top of mind. So yeah, I mean, hopefully you don't need to have a family member go through that to embody some of that, but for me it's definitely changed my outlook, and I think for the better, although it's obviously a tragedy.
I'm sorry to hear that, and it is great advice, but sorry to hear that.
No transformative business advice yet, but what about you? What's been the best? Have you heard any really good ones?
I mean, there's been a lot.
There's a lot.
What's the worst one?
The worst one?
Yeah, I don't know that I could pick my favorite out of ones that people have given. I mean, my favorite one that my father has said is that you can't have a rational conversation with an irrational person.
Yeah.
And I think that saved me a fair amount of like frustration. I don't know why that one like really, stuck with me. But we've had a lot, and all of them have been great, and yours was phenomenal. So we really appreciate it.
I like that. I like when you're talking to like someone that's a conspiracy theorist, or you're like, you want to argue with them, but you're like, wait, you know way more about this issue in your own warped data that you've interpreted. So it's like, I'm just gonna
Teach
gonna
their
stop
own,
this
though, right?
combo.
Each their own. Each their own. Well, on that note, now that we're talking about conspiracy theories, it was so great to have you on, Matt. We really, really appreciate it. Certainly looking forward to catching up sometime soon in New York. And thank you again so much for joining us.
Yes, it was a pleasure. I really enjoyed it, and keep in touch. Thank you so much.
Thank you.